and your big head are sitting at a red light in your £72,000 Range Rover Sport. The leather smells new. The dashboard lights up like the cockpit of a private jet. And when you pull next to a little Toyota Yaris at the lights, you're sitting half a meter higher than everyone else on the road. You feel powerful. You feel successful. You feel like a man who's got life figured out. Except here's the uncomfortable truth. You work in an office. Your job involves zero farming, zero construction, and the most heavy lifting you do all week is carrying a laptop into a climate-controlled building. Meanwhile, that giant SUV you're driving, the boot has carried exactly 3 things in the last 6 months. A bag from B&Q, your kid's scooter, and a pack of bottled water from Costco. But financially, you're bleeding money so fast, you've basically become a monthly donation to Land Rover's profits. Because today, we're going to talk about the SUV status trap. Not what the dealership tells you, not what your mates justify at the pub. We're going to run the actual numbers on what it costs to pretend you're ready to drive across the Sahara while commuting 20 minutes to an office park in Milton Keynes. And once you see the maths behind this decision, you'll realize something brutal. Buying these cars doesn't make you look successful. It quietly destroys your wealth. Now, here's the part most people don't want to admit. You didn't buy that SUV because you needed it. You bought it because someone sold you an idea. The idea that a bigger vehicle somehow makes you more capable, more successful, more of a man. Watch any car advert. The SUV isn't stuck in traffic outside a Tesco. It's climbing mountains, driving through mud, pulling a horse trailer across the countryside. Meanwhile, the reality, you're sitting in a queue on the M25, listening to a podcast, waiting for the light to turn green. The marketing is genius. They take a vehicle built for farmers, contractors, and people hauling serious equipment and sell it to accountants in Chelmsford. Because deep down, they know something about human psychology. Men will happily spend tens of thousands of pounds to feel like the kind of man who could drive across a muddy field, even if the closest thing they've seen to mud this year is a puddle in a Sainsbury's car park. And this is where the maths starts getting ugly. Because once you stop looking at the badge on the bonnet and start looking at the numbers behind it, you realize something fast. This status symbol you're driving is one of the worst financial decisions most people ever make. Let's start with the purchase price, because this is where the brain quietly switches off. A well-specced Range Rover Sport in the UK, you're looking at somewhere between £70,000 and £90,000. For context, the median full-time salary in the UK is about £35,000, which means a huge number of people are financing a vehicle that costs 2 years of their income. Just pause on that for a second. You're borrowing money to buy something that costs more than 24 months of work. And this is where the dealership magic happens, because they don't focus on the price, they focus on the monthly payment. They sit you down, slide a tablet across the desk, and say something like, "Good news, mate. We can get this to £895 a month." Suddenly, the £80,000 price tag disappears. Now it feels manageable, almost reasonable. But what they don't emphasize is how they made the payment look that small. They stretched the finance to 6 or 7 years. 7 freaking years. You'll be paying for that car longer than many people stay in a relationship. And once you start running the real numbers, the cost of that decision gets brutal very quickly. Now let's talk about the part nobody mentions during the test drive, running costs. Because the payment isn't the real problem. The real problem is everything that comes after it. Start with fuel. A big SUV, like a Range Rover Sport, gets roughly 22 miles per gallon in real driving. A normal saloon, like a Toyota Corolla or Honda Civic, gets closer to 50 miles per gallon. Let's say you drive about 12,000 miles a year, which is pretty average in the UK. At current petrol prices, that SUV will cost you roughly £3,000 a year in fuel. The sensible car, closer to £1,300. That's a £1,700 difference every year, just so you can sit slightly higher than the car next to you. Then there's insurance. Because you're not insuring a normal vehicle, you're insuring an £80,000 luxury asset. If you crash a small hatchback, the insurer might pay out £15,000 or £20,000. If you write off a Range Rover, they're staring at £80,000, which means your premiums quietly creep higher every year. And we haven't even touched tires yet. Those massive performance tires, replacing a full set can easily cost £1,200 to £1,600. Meanwhile, a normal car might cost £400. But it gets worse, because once you add all of this together, the real monthly cost of that £895 payment starts looking very different. Now, let's add everything together, because this is where the numbers start looking ridiculous. Your monthly finance payment, roughly £895. Extra fuel compared to a normal car, about £140 a month. Higher insurance, another £70 to £100. Tires, servicing and maintenance, call it £120 a month once you average it out. Vehicle tax and registration, another £40 or £50 depending on the model. So when you stop pretending the payment is the only cost, your £895 a month SUV actually costs closer to £1,250 to £1,300 every month. That's £15,000 a year just to drive to work. And here's the part most people never calculate. You didn't buy the car with cash, you financed it, which means over 6 or 7 years. You're not paying £80,000. You're paying closer to £95,000 or £100,000 once interest is included. All for something that loses value every single year. Imagine taking £100,000 in cash and slowly setting fire to it over 7 years. That's basically the financial experience of owning one of these cars. And once you compare it to the alternative, the decision starts looking even worse. Now let's look at the alternative universe, the version of you that didn't buy the £80,000 SUV. In this universe, you bought something boring. A 3-year-old Toyota Corolla, maybe a Honda Civic, reliable, cheap to run, completely invisible at the pub car park. That car costs about £5,000 to £9,000 used. Your monthly payment, around £150 to £300. Fuel is cheaper, insurance is cheaper, tires are cheaper, maintenance is cheaper. Your total monthly transport cost, roughly £450 to £600. Compare that to the SUV, £1,300 a month. That's a difference of about £800 every month, or around £8,200 every year. Over the 7 years you're paying off that SUV, that decision costs you roughly £50,000. £50,000, just so you can sit a bit higher in traffic and look rugged in the Tesco car park. But here's the part that really hurts. You're not just spending that money, you're losing what that money could have become. Because money doesn't just disappear, it has an opportunity cost. That £800 a month difference, if you invested it instead of burning it on a car, the outcome looks very different. Let's say you put that money into a boring index fund. Nothing fancy, just something averaging around 8% a year. After 7 years, you'd have roughly £65,000. That's a house deposit. That's financial breathing room. That's the difference between being stuck and having options. But instead, that money went somewhere else. Into fuel, into depreciation, into interest payments, into the bank account of a car finance company. Think about the irony. You bought the SUV to feel successful. But the version of you driving the boring Corolla is quietly building real wealth in the background. One looks rich in the Tesco car park. The other one actually is rich. And the money isn't the only thing this decision damages. It starts quietly warping your entire financial life. Because once that £1,300 monthly payment exists, everything else in your life has to orbit around it. First thing it destroys, your ability to buy a house. Mortgage lenders look at something called your debt-to-income ratio. In simple terms, how much of your salary is already locked into payments. That SUV alone could be eating 25 to 30% of your monthly income before rent, before student loans, before a mortgage. Congratulations, you just locked yourself out of buying a £300,000 home because you wanted to look rugged at the Starbucks drive-thru. Then there's holidays. Your friends plan a trip to Spain. Flights are £120. Hotel is £300. Food and spending money may be another £400. You look at your bank account. You've just made the car payment. You've got £200 left until payday. So you tell them you're too busy with work. They go. You stay home and wash the SUV in the driveway like it's a hobby. The car isn't just expensive. It quietly starts limiting your life. And this is where the trap gets psychological. Because you didn't just buy a car, you bought an identity. Car companies understand this perfectly. They're not selling vehicles. They're selling a story about who you are. Watch the adverts. The SUV is always climbing mountains, driving through mud, pulling a boat out of a lake. They never show the real version. A guy in business casual, sitting in traffic outside a retail park, on his way to an office job. Because the reality isn't exciting, the fantasy is. And once you tie your identity to that car, getting rid of it becomes emotionally painful. Even if the math says you should. It's like wearing an expensive costume. You know it's costing you money, but taking it off feels like admitting you were fooled. Which is exactly how the marketing works. Convince people the car represents masculinity, competence, success, and suddenly they'll happily finance it for 7 years, even if it quietly destroys their finances. So here's the uncomfortable conclusion. That £80,000 SUV, it isn't transportation. It's a luxury item pretending to be practical. And once you strip away the badge, the leather seats, and the marketing, the maths becomes brutally simple. Over 7 years, that vehicle quietly costs you somewhere between £50,000 and £70,000 more than a sensible alternative. That's not a small difference. That's a life difference. Because the boring car gives you something the expensive one never will. Margin, options, freedom. The SUV gives you something else, a monthly payment and a depreciating asset. So the next time you're standing in a dealership and the salesperson is walking you through the heated seats, the leather steering wheel, and the panoramic roof, remember this. They're not selling you a vehicle, they're selling you a financial prison with very nice upholstery. And the real flex in 2026 isn't driving the most expensive car in the car park. It's driving something boring, while quietly building wealth in the background.